There are moments that split a life in two, the version before the truth and the version after it. And on a night meant to celebrate wealth, power, and polished reputations, one single act shattered every illusion in the room. Evelyn Hartwell, the billionaire's wife known for her perfect posture and cold, practiced smile, stood from her seat with a trembling hand wrapped around a half-filled wine glass. People noticed the tension in her shoulders, the stiff way she inhaled as if trying to steady something already slipping out of her control. Then, in a motion so quick the room barely caught it, she hurled the wine into the face of the calm, composed black man beside her. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing at once. Phones froze midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. And Evelyn leaned in, jaw tight, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence as she whispered, "Know your place." He didn't shout. He didn't rise. He didn't match her rage. Instead, he wiped the dripping wine from his chin with a steady hand, the kind of steadiness that made the crowd even more uneasy. Some guests looked away, afraid of what might follow. Others watched with a kind of disbelief, wondering how a woman so accustomed to being admired had just crossed a line so public, so irreversible. The man finally lifted his eyes to hers, not with anger, but with a quiet certainty she couldn't read. And that's where everything shifts. Because in that moment, surrounded by people who thought they understood power, Evelyn Hartwell had no idea she had just humiliated the new CEO of the corporation that owned her husband's entire empire. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. How did the most admired woman in the room manage to destroy her own dynasty in less than 24 hours? Long before the wine glass shattered her reputation, Evelyn Hartwell built her life on the illusion that nothing could touch her. People saw elegance when she entered a room, but beneath those carefully chosen outfits and polished smiles lived a woman terrified of being replaced, overlooked, or forgotten. For years, she carried the pressure of being the billionaire's perfect wife, attending charity events, hosting galas, correcting every small detail in her home so nothing looked out of place. But the cracks were forming quietly. Her husband, Charles Hartwell, was no longer the confident man she once defended in every room. He was distracted, restless, and avoiding questions he used to answer without hesitation. Evelyn noticed the late-night phone calls, the stress he tried to hide, the way he stared at the same financial report as if wishing the numbers would change on their own. And deep down, she knew something was slipping beyond her control. What Evelyn didn't know was that Hartwell Aero Defense, the company her husband inherited from his father, was only weeks away from collapsing. 14,000 employees depended on a single contract to keep their paychecks, their homes, and their futures intact. The only path forward was securing a partnership with Dominion Holdings, a massive corporation powerful enough to rewrite the fate of any business it touched. Charles was terrified, so terrified that he hid the truth even from his closest advisors. And then, almost without warning, Dominion sent someone new to evaluate the Hartwell empire, Marcus Hale. The same calm man Evelyn humiliated at the gala. To her, he looked like just another executive trying to impress her husband. She didn't realize he was the one man capable of saving or ending everything she thought she owned. And beneath that, another layer she couldn't name. Why the sight of him unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Charles tried to act as though Marcus's arrival was routine, but the uneasiness in his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't slept in days. He feared that one wrong impression could cost him the entire deal, and with it, 14,000 families who trusted him. He also feared Evelyn's temper, because she believed someone had been stealing her husband's spotlight, someone who didn't belong in their world. She had seen Marcus only twice before the gala. Each time feeling a strange familiarity, she shrugged off as irritation. She didn't remember him, but he remembered her, more than she could imagine. And while she suspected hidden motives everywhere, she assumed the danger came from outsiders trying to ruin her husband. She never considered that Charles himself was hiding bigger secrets. A financial past he wasn't proud of, a miscalculation he hoped no one would uncover, and a truth that would make everything she believed about their life unravel. Evelyn arrived at the gala long before most of the guests, determined to inspect every detail. She carried her stress the way others carried designer bags, visible, heavy, and impossible to ignore. The moment she stepped inside, she began correcting things that didn't need correcting, moving centerpieces half an inch to the left, adjusting the name cards, as if the slightest misalignment would ruin her entire evening. She questioned the menu, the lighting, even the temperature of the champagne. Staff members nodded politely while exchanging quiet glances behind her back. She pushed through each interaction with the same rigid expectation, perfection. And whenever something didn't match the image she wanted to project, she reacted with sharp comments that left people uneasy. What she didn't realize was that her need for control wasn't calming her. It was revealing just how fragile she felt under the surface, especially now that her husband seemed further away than ever. As the ballroom began to fill, Evelyn's attention shifted from the decorations to the people. She watched guests mingle and evaluated their outfits, their ranks, their importance. Whenever a server walked too slowly or set a glass at the wrong angle, she made a point of correcting them loudly, reminding everyone who held the highest social status in the room. But all that confidence faltered when she noticed a man seated near the VIP area, someone she didn't recognize, someone she assumed had made a mistake. She narrowed her eyes, irritated that any unfamiliar face would sit so close to her table. In her mind, only those with influence belonged there. The calm, composed man who occupied one of those seats didn't fit her expectations, and irritation began to build. She whispered to a nearby staff member, "Keep the help away from my table," unaware that the person she dismissed so casually was watching her in complete silence. Charles entered moments later, and the sight of Marcus seated near the VIP section hit him like a sudden jolt. His shoulders tensed, his expression tightened, and for a brief second, he stopped walking altogether. Evelyn saw it, the sudden shift, the unease in her husband's eyes, but she read it completely wrong. She assumed he was embarrassed by the seating arrangement, assuming he also believed a staff member had wandered into an area reserved for decision-makers. She whispered sharply that she would handle it, but Charles shook his head with a quiet desperation she didn't understand. Meanwhile, Marcus remained still, his hands folded, his gaze steady and observant. Every comment Evelyn made, every order she barked, every assumption she voiced, he absorbed all of it without saying a word. To him, it wasn't just a display of entitlement. It was information, and that information would carry more weight than she could possibly anticipate. As more guests arrived, conversations began to shift toward Dominion Holdings, the company everyone was trying to impress. Small groups whispered while glancing discreetly toward Marcus, unsure of whether they should approach him. Their uncertainty only added to Evelyn's confusion. She assumed they were whispering about her, admiring her outfit or her table, completely unaware their attention had nothing to do with her. She tried to read lips, tried to catch fragments of their discussions, but each time she did, she found herself growing more irritated. What annoyed her most was Marcus's calm demeanor, the way he didn't seem intimidated by the room she practically ruled. Then, just as Evelyn prepared to confront him, the crowd shifted. Someone important stepped inside, a figure guests recognized immediately. They approached Marcus with genuine warmth, greeting him with a title that was cut short by a sudden interruption. And for the first time, Evelyn couldn't predict what came next. The moment lingered, unfinished, heavy, confusing. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest, a feeling she refused to name. She watched Marcus respond to the greeting with quiet confidence, as if he wasn't out of place at all, as if he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. She couldn't shake the odd sense that she had seen him before, though she convinced herself it was irritation, not memory. Guests exchanged glances, whispering again, but this time their voices carried a hint of respect that Evelyn hadn't anticipated. And while she remained unaware of his true role, Marcus's expression told a different story. He wasn't just taking notes on the event, he was taking notes on her. The narrator brings us closer to the truth with a single unanswered question. The real shock wasn't Evelyn's behavior. It was what Marcus knew about her past. A past she didn't recognize standing right in front of her. Long before she stood in ballrooms correcting table settings and demanding respect, Evelyn Hartwell lived a very different life. She grew up in a quiet neighborhood where her mother worked double shifts and her father fixed broken appliances in their garage to cover extra bills. There was nothing glamorous about those years, and Evelyn learned early that admiration didn't come easily. She watched other girls get praised for their confidence, their beauty, their family's clean-cut reputations. She carried the weight of wanting more, craving the kind of life she saw on magazine covers. So when she met Charles Hartwell in her early 20s, a man whose last name opened doors she didn't even know existed, she saw a chance to rewrite her story. She wasn't ashamed of wanting better, but somewhere along the way, her desire to rise above her past turned into an obsession with burying it completely. Marriage gave Evelyn access to everything she once envied: influence, luxury, and a new identity that erased the girl she used to be. But instead of finding comfort in her success, she built a mask made of superiority, a barrier designed to keep anyone from remembering where she started. She distanced herself from old friends one by one, insisting the separation was necessary for her new life. And among the people she left behind was someone who mattered deeply, someone who believed in her long before the world learned her name. She justified cutting them off as part of her transformation, convincing herself that her past had nothing to offer the woman she planned to become. Yet even after years of wealth, she lived with a quiet fear that a single reminder from her former life could undo everything she worked so hard to hide. What Evelyn never expected was that her carefully guarded past would walk right back into her world at the very moment she felt safest. Marcus Hale's calm presence in the ballroom unsettled her not because she recognized him, but because something in him felt uncomfortably familiar. There was a steadiness in his eyes she had seen before, long before anyone called her Mrs. Hartwell. She couldn't place the memory, but Marcus could. He remembered the girl who used to laugh at simple things, who dreamed loudly, who promised never to forget the people who stood by her when life was unkind. And he remembered the moment she broke that promise. There was a dark chapter in Evelyn's past, a choice she made to protect her ambition, a choice she hoped would never surface. And the narrator leaves us with the question tightening around the story: what did Evelyn do that Marcus knows about? Marcus sat quietly at the edge of the VIP area, phone in hand, scanning messages that appeared almost as shadows on the screen. Each notification brought fragments of information. Someone had been watching Evelyn, noting every gesture, every sharp word, every glare she cast at anyone who didn't meet her standards. He didn't react outwardly. His calm presence hid the careful assessment happening inside his mind. Evelyn caught him glancing at his phone and immediately assumed the worst. "Who do you think you are, pretending to check messages in my gala?" she whispered to herself, irritated, unaware that Marcus wasn't concerned with social climbing or networking. He was piecing together patterns, connecting events in ways she couldn't yet perceive. And the room hummed around them, the tension between observation and assumption thickening, as Evelyn tightened her posture, asserting control over a situation she didn't understand. Charles, sensing the growing friction, approached Evelyn with quiet urgency, pulling her aside in a brief moment of privacy. His voice was low, almost desperate. "Evelyn, please, just act normal. Don't make this worse," he urged. But his concern only fueled her frustration. She turned on him sharply, the years of restraint cracking in her tone. "Normal? You expect me to pretend everything is perfect while you hide half your empire from me?" Her words struck deeper than she realized, revealing the tension that had been simmering in their marriage for months. Charles looked away, unable to answer, weighed down by the fear of failure, the secrets he carried, and the realization that their unity was fragile. Every glance between them held unspoken accusations, and every gesture amplified the instability in the room. Marcus, observing the exchange from his position, barely moved. His attention split between Evelyn's outburst and the incoming call he knew would come eventually. The screen lit up, displaying a voice that carried authority and concern. Is she acting the same way as before? Marcus's hand tightened around the phone, his calm voice barely above a whisper. "Worse," he replied. That single word carried weight, heavy enough to hang over the room without anyone else knowing. Evelyn continued her performance of superiority and irritation, oblivious that every action was being catalogued, assessed, and remembered. Charles's pleading eyes, Evelyn's thinly veiled rage, and Marcus's quiet observation were all pieces of a puzzle converging toward a moment that could destroy the fragile equilibrium of their lives. And the narrator leaves the audience suspended, knowing the collision is inevitable. The room felt heavier than it had all evening. Conversations hummed in the background, but Evelyn Hartwell barely noticed. Her focus was on Marcus Hale, the man she had dismissed, humiliated, and assumed was merely a minor figure. She could feel her confidence cracking, the control she had built over years of appearances slipping in seconds. Then, the truth landed like a thunderclap. Marcus Hale was no minor executive. He was the newly appointed CEO of Dominion Holdings, the very company Charles had been courting for weeks. The same company holding the fate of Hartwell Aero Defense and 14,000 jobs in its hands. Evelyn's jaw tightened, her pride colliding with the realization that her reckless arrogance had just targeted the one person who could make or break everything they had worked for. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like the moment a life she thought she controlled had started to unravel. For Marcus, the night remained calm on the surface, but inside, every gesture from Evelyn had been catalogued. Her impatience, her sharp words, her belief in her own untouchable status. Now he had the power she hadn't anticipated. He could influence the outcome of the deal that would decide whether Charles's empire survived or crumbled. The humiliation Evelyn had inflicted on him in front of the city's elite was now irreversible, but it only added clarity to his assessment. He knew what was at stake, what secrets remained buried, and the precise moment when the walls of their carefully curated lives would begin to collapse. And as the narrator's voice lingers over the scene, the audience is drawn into a question they can't ignore. How does someone so consumed by image and control recover when the very foundation of their world is held by the person they humiliated? If you're still watching to this point, comment. I'm here. Let's see the real ones. The story is just beginning, and what follows will test every assumption Evelyn has ever held about power, loyalty, and the past she thought she buried. The moment Evelyn Hartwell left the gala, the consequences began to ripple faster than she could anticipate. Word spread quickly. Dominion Holdings board had been notified of her public outburst, the humiliation captured on dozens of phones and quietly shared with key investors. The spreadsheets, projections, and carefully crafted quarterly reports suddenly seemed fragile under the weight of her actions. Panic rippled through the financial world. Investors questioned the judgment of anyone associated with Hartwell Aero Defense, and murmurs about instability grew louder with every passing hour. In offices across the city, analysts highlighted the gala incident as a warning, a sign that leadership was out of control. And yet, Evelyn's focus remained misplaced. She blamed Marcus Hale entirely, convinced that his presence had provoked her humiliation. She didn't stop to consider that he had stayed calm to prevent exactly this, trying quietly, deliberately, to contain the fallout before it escalated further. Journalists, sensing a story that combined wealth, power, and scandal, were quicker than anyone expected. Cell phone footage leaked online, headlines spread, and social media buzzed with speculation. Every angle painted Evelyn as reckless, entitled, and volatile. Friends of the family whispered in private, unsure whether to confront her or avoid her entirely. Meanwhile, Marcus remained silent. He wasn't seeking revenge, wasn't manipulating the press, wasn't scheming to topple her life for the sake of satisfaction. His goal was far more deliberate: truth. The subtle, almost imperceptible way he had observed her all evening now mattered, because what he knew went beyond one humiliating moment. It revealed cracks, secrets, and choices Evelyn had made long before she ever entered the ballroom. And as the narrator pauses over the scene, the audience is left with the question tightening around the story. The true fallout hadn't even begun, because Marcus wasn't seeking revenge. He wanted truth. Marcus Hale had long carried a quiet memory, one that rarely surfaced in the meetings, boardrooms, and social functions that now defined his life. Years ago, Evelyn Hartwell had been at the center of a decision that changed everything for someone he cared about deeply. She had sabotaged a scholarship program, an opportunity meant to lift promising students out of obscurity, simply to protect her own rise. The move was calculated, precise, and entirely self-serving, though she had believed it inconsequential. The family of the student affected struggled silently, their potential dimmed, doors closed that would never reopen. Marcus never forgot the faces, the whispered stories of hope turned into disappointment, or the injustice that went unpunished. And now, years later, Evelyn had walked into his life again, unaware that the calm man she believed beneath her attention was, In fact, someone intimately tied to the consequences of her actions. This was why Marcus never reacted with visible anger. While Evelyn flaunted superiority and belittled others, he remained measured, observing every movement, every expression, every word. The memory of the past informed his restraint, not his vengeance. He understood the weight of what she had done, but he also understood that exposing it required precision, timing, and patience. One misstep could destroy lives beyond her own, or ruin the delicate balance he had been entrusted to maintain. To the world, he was calm, composed, even indifferent. To Evelyn, he appeared unimpressed, mysterious, almost untouchable. But inside, every glance at her reminded him of years of injustice, of doors slammed shut and promises broken, of a past she didn't even know she had left behind. And the narrator leaves the audience reflecting. Every action has consequences, some of which will return when least expected. Behind a closed office door, Marcus Hale and Charles Hartwell sat across from one another, the tension between them almost tangible. Marcus placed a stack of documents on the table, the edges crisp, the numbers undeniable. He didn't speak more than necessary. Each word carried weight. Slowly, Charles's composure crumbled as he realized there was no hiding from the truth any longer. Hartwell Aero Defense, the empire he had built and defended for years, was hiding massive debt, liabilities that could topple the company within weeks. He admitted, voice breaking, that he had tried to warn Evelyn for years, carefully hinting at the dangers, hoping she would understand, hoping she would act. Every line on those documents was a mirror of choices deferred, mistakes ignored, and pride unchecked. Marcus watched silently, cataloging not just the financial failures but the human toll, the pressure that had been quietly building behind Evelyn's elegant mask of perfection. Outside the office door, Evelyn Hartwell lingered, unnoticed, yet fully aware of the voices inside. Every detail of the conversation reached her. The tremble in Charles's voice, the unyielding calm of Marcus, the documents that promised devastation if ignored. In that moment, the world she had built, carefully curated appearances, relentless control, unwavering superiority, began to unravel. She realized her perfect life had been built on unstable foundations, and for the first time, she felt the raw vulnerability she had spent decades hiding. Panic mingled with disbelief as she imagined the consequences. The employees, the investors, the empire she had taken pride in, all teetering on the edge. And just as the narrator draws the audience closer to her inner turmoil, a subtle hint emerges. The final blow wasn't coming from the debts, the investors, or even the humiliation at the gala. It was coming from someone Evelyn never expected. The gala continued, the chandeliers casting sparkling light over a room that had once felt controlled and curated, now buzzing with tension. Evelyn Hartwell, consumed by fear and rage, finally confronted Marcus Hale in front of the very guests who had once admired her poise. Every step she took was calculated to reclaim her status, yet the desperation in her movements betrayed her. Her voice, sharp and trembling, demanded attention, but it carried only the echo of her unraveling. She flailed against the reality she had ignored for so long. The collapsing empire, the mounting debt, the judgment of investors, and the quiet certainty in Marcus's eyes that she had miscalculated every move. She reached for the nearest wine glass, a symbol of elegance twisted into aggression, and hurled it with all the force of her fury toward the man she still underestimated, unaware that cameras had already captured her actions for the world to see. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood calmly as the wine splashed across him, his composure unshaken, his voice quiet but lethal in its clarity. "I was going to save your company, but now I'll save it from you." The words cut through the room, echoing in the stunned silence of the onlookers. Everything Evelyn had controlled, the image, the power, the perception of invincibility, collapsed in an instant. Dominion Holdings immediately withdrew their offer, the deal that had been the company's lifeline vanishing as quickly as her pride. Investors pulled out, signaling a crisis that would dominate headlines. Charles, burdened by his own failures and the exposure of hidden debts, was removed as CEO, leaving Evelyn with nothing but the weight of public humiliation. Cameras flashed, recording her fury and disbelief for an audience that would never forget the moment entitlement met consequence. In that instant, Evelyn Hartwell became the embodiment of ambition and arrogance undone, a cautionary story etched into memory. In the aftermath of the gala, silence settled over the ruins of what had once seemed untouchable. Evelyn Hartwell stood alone, her carefully constructed world disintegrating with every passing moment. The social circle that once celebrated her now whispered behind her back, doors that had always been open slammed shut. Her influence, painstakingly cultivated through years of appearances and control, evaporated under the weight of her own actions. Her marriage, once a symbol of stability and power, fractured irreparably, leaving her to face the consequences of ambition unchecked. Even her identity, the image she had carefully polished for decades, was stripped away, leaving only the person she had tried to hide beneath layers of perfection. And through it all, Marcus Hale remained composed, a quiet observer and executor of justice, ensuring that Hartwell Aero Defense would survive, not through entitlement or arrogance, but through accountability and truth. Marcus's voice, calm and deliberate, carried over the remnants of what had been the Hartwell's empire. Humiliation doesn't destroy power, but arrogance, that destroys everything it touches. Those words were not spoken to demean, but to remind that unchecked pride, false superiority, and disregard for others have consequences far greater than public embarrassment. The company, once teetering on the edge of collapse, now had the chance to rebuild without the weight of mismanaged legacy and ego. Marcus had not acted for revenge. He acted to correct, to restore balance, and to honor responsibility over reputation. Evelyn's downfall became a cautionary tale, a story repeated in boardrooms and newsrooms alike, illustrating how ambition without empathy, control without self-awareness, and arrogance without foresight can topple even the most meticulously constructed lives. And as the narrator's voice fades, the audience is left reflecting. Power can survive many things, but it cannot survive itself unchecked. Some mistakes are accidents, others are choices, and sometimes the cost of those choices is everything. Evelyn Hartwell's story isn't just about wealth, status, or public humiliation. It's about the fragility of control and the weight of decisions made without regard for consequences. Marcus Hale's restraint, his calm observation, and his quiet insistence on truth remind us that power is not measured by arrogance or appearance, but by responsibility and integrity. As the echoes of that night linger, we are forced to ask ourselves, what would you have done in Marcus's place? Do you believe Evelyn deserved the consequences of her actions? Have you ever witnessed ambition or arrogance ruin someone you knew? Take a moment to reflect on the choices we make, the masks we wear, and the truths we try to bury. If this story moved you, hit the like button so more people can see it. And subscribe for more stories just like this.